Hello and welcome to Everyday Politics with Laura May Lindo. I am your host, Laura May, and today I am tuning in, hosting this lovely episode on land that is held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. And I want to offer you this reflection. I happen to be teaching right now at the University of Waterloo a course on the philosophy of education. And as we've been using the first couple episodes to talk more deeply about the impact of Bill 33, which is an act to amend various acts in relation to child, youth, and family services, education, and colleges and universities, I've been speaking a lot with my students about the experiences of our educational system that Indigenous community members have given us more insight into. And when we think about these experiences, for instance, I often talk to folks about the experience of residential schools and the fact that it was legislated. It sometimes leaves us feeling disempowered. And part of what I wanted to do, especially with today's episode, was to take some time to find ways for the community to see where they could intervene. And so if we know that legislation can make legal experiences like residential schools for Indigenous communities, then we also have to hold the responsibility to do better today. And so as we think about Bill 33, as we think about the potential impact, I invite you to sit back, relax, and listen to a conversation that I am about to have with Mr. Patrick Case, the former Assistant Deputy Minister of Education in Ontario. He and I are going to sit down and chat about Bill 33, and we will be right back to get started on this conversation after this break.
Hey, what's up? We're Chris and Cam, host of What's Buzzin' right here on Rogers TV.
We talk about local trends, we interview local guests, and we overall just have a lot of fun.
8 p.m. Wednesday nights on Rogers TV.
Stay tuned.
Hello, be sure to join me on Mondays at 8 p.m. here on Rogers TV for Lions TV Bingo. And starting this summer, we're going to have a new kind of card. So remember, new cards for the same great game every Monday, Lions TV Bingo.
Hi, Pastor Mark here. Join us each and every week on Sundays. There is a place for you here, a place to explore, a place to dream, a place to journey, and a place to belong. All are welcome, no exceptions. That is St. Peter's Church, every Sunday at 11 a.m. God bless. We'll see you soon.
The regulars, the guys who keep this place in business. Last week, they had something to celebrate. Jason had just finished university. So they toasted his profs, his TAs, his old roommates. Well, they toasted just about everyone. But I worry about and take care of my guys. So even when I know they're not driving, sometimes that means bringing them a little surprise. And then they had a drink to me.
Brought to you by Smart Serve Ontario and Arrive Alive, Drive Sober.
Mondays at 6 p.m., we're bringing an exciting new show to you, Inside Brant with our Amanda. You can look forward to it to find out what's going on in Brant County. And we will have all kinds of local artisans and tons of stuff that your family can enjoy. So if it's happening here in Brant County, you can be sure to see it here, 6 p.m. every Monday on Inside Brant.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. And Pat, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
So for folks that have been watching, the first few episodes of season 2 have been dedicated to Bill 33. So I have spoken to people about this bill. I have given them sort of a high level understanding. It impacts we're focused on the educational impacts of Bill 33. So it has some amendments that would impact K to 12 as well as post-secondary. But one of the things that was interesting when I reached out to you, Pat, was the plethora of experiences in education that you bring to the table. So for you, you've been a trustee on the school board. You've been an investigator. For those that are watching, some folks have seen me post some of the reports, and I will have some of those posted with this particular episode as well. But you've also been an assistant deputy minister of education. So you've been outside the system, inside the system, beside the system. You know all about the system. And so my very first question to you is to share with us some of the successes and challenges that you've seen from those various roles.
Oh, well, yeah, from the various roles. Well,
Pick one and start it rolling.
That takes me back a bit. You know, I became a school trustee at the Toronto Board of Education in 1979. And at that time, um, during that election, there was a progressive majority of trustees elected.
Mm-hmm.
The board had been going through conversations about race relations, as it were, in the previous two terms. And one of the things that I had been working on was a race relations report. When I think back to that report now, it really was quite, groundbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
But its problems were manifest in the fact that when it came to the issue, for example, of employment, it was virtually silent. Um, the issue of employment and changing up the board's employment practices so that that schools might become more representative of the communities around them was a third rail.
Wow.
People just didn't want to talk about it. Most of the focus of the race relations report lay on soft stuff, on curriculum, in particular, and on swapping out books, reviewing books, but nevertheless, I have to say that the report and its recommendations were a success, and without question, a major advance in addressing race-related issues at the board.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because prior to the race relations report, the board had a period of time where it was dealing with multiculturalism,
Yep.
more generally, but nothing with regard to sexual orientation, nothing with regard to disability, nothing with regard to sexism in schools, right? And certainly not, and very little to do with class. Although it was quite clear that that poverty had a huge impact on many of the children in Toronto schools. I think one of the successes during that period of time was the opening up of conversations about poverty. And one of the ways in which that was addressed in a very practical sense was in a set of contract negotiations that took place between the board and the elementary school teachers pretty much at the beginning of my first term of office. The province had declared 108 teaching positions to be surplus to the board's to the formula that spat out teachers. The board was on the hook to sort of fire those people if it couldn't come up with the money. But where was it going to come up with the money to pay these people?
Yeah.
During the negotiations, the local union agreed, that is the Toronto Teachers Federation, agreed to split the cost of those teachers with the board. The board at that time had the power to raise taxes marginally
Yeah.
in Toronto, what was called the local levy. So the board provided half of the money for the 108. The teachers paid the other half out of their compensation package. So that 108 teachers, those teachers were jobs were saved. But what's really important, it wasn't about taking teachers' jobs so much as it was how those teachers were used. They were deployed in inner city schools right around the city. The board had conducted several surveys having to do with income, ethnicity, race, and so on across the city, and come up with an inner city index. So there were schools that were inner city ranked 1, 1A, 1B, 2, 3, and 4.
Mm-hmm.
The ones in 1A and B were the ones with the neediest, heavy-duty poverty affected schools. And those schools received the lion's share of those 108 teachers. So they went into libraries and they went into the classroom to lower class sizes. So that I think was a singular success and set the board on a track that I think is still influences the way that the Toronto board runs, because although it doesn't have the same sort of ranking, well, it doesn't have the identical ranking. It still has a ranking as far as schools are concerned, based on poverty, based on ethnicity, and it does try to establish project schools across the board, where more resources are put in than in perhaps other schools. So that was the start of that work
Yeah.
back there, and quite successful. So,
And that's before you move on from there, what I love about that example is the creative use of people's positions of influence.
yeah,
Because a lot of times we talk about challenges, and we're going to get into one of the things that we've been talking about as a challenge. So the potential implications of Bill 33 can be
yeah,
positioned as a challenge. But the reason why I love that story is because you're demonstrating a creative use of your station at that time with those particular challenges
yeah.
to still meet and attain like an educational goal that was so
Yeah, to
very
solve a
important.
problem. Yeah, to
Absolutely.
solve a massive problem.
Absolutely.
So, um, cutting to fairly recently, I left public education after being in uh, being a school trustee, and then coming back and working in the Human Rights Office, or what it was called, the Equal Opportunity Office at the Toronto Board of Education. But when my return fairly recently, back in 2017, was occasioned by involvement in helping to conduct a review of the York Region District School Board.
Mm-hmm.
And that review was brought about because of real concerns about the governance of the board
Mm-hmm.
and the behavior of the director of the board and various other officials. But it was after that, and after tabling the report, that I got my job as a assistant deputy minister at the Ministry of Education. What had happened is that the then deputy minister, um, somebody who had worked in the system himself, recognized that there had been, as we know, umpteen reports on equity and human rights
Yeah.
and on anti-Black racism coming out of the system for decades. And for him, the question was, well, can we set up a secretariat in the ministry, responsibility of which is to actually put some of that stuff into action? And so
Mm-hmm.
2017, Bruce Rodriguez set up the Education Equity Secretariat. I was hired to be the assistant deputy minister within that secretariat. And within the space of about 5 or 6 months, we came up with what was known as the Education Action Plan that was then put out in the sector, and brought attention to several areas, but really clearly defined areas in education that had to be addressed. One of them was that at that point, still only one school board in Ontario had data identifying who its students were, and that was the Target District School Board. What the plan did was to set out a goal that every school board ought to have that similar data, identifying who the students were based on human rights grounds. Right? That was one thing. Another goal had to do with leadership within the boards and advancing human rights-based leadership across the province. And some of that included establishing positions within those boards as human rights and equity advisors, people who would report to the directors of the boards, but whose responsibility would be to drive human rights within the boards in which they were located. Yet another area of focus had to do with classroom practices. And although the plan didn't say we got to get rid of streaming, it really was focused on that, right? And focused on the notion that streaming of students in the way in which it's conducted in Ontario was wrong and had to be addressed really upfront. And then the last aspect of it had to do with cultural change, particularly within the ministry itself, and the way in which the ministry worked to address human rights. So I think that looking back on those 4 areas, that there was significant progress in all of them. Indeed, at this point, all boards in Ontario have data identifying who their students are, right? And are responsible for disaggregating that data along grounds that are in the Human Rights Code, as well as, and in addition to that, having to do with family income as well, right?
So this is perfect, because what I'm going to pause us there, because my next set of questions is something that's come up all through season 1. It's come up when I've spoken about education, and it's come up again when we've talked about Bill 33, but sort of distinguishing between the role of regulations in the province and legislation. So when legislation comes out, there's a whole ton of stuff that happens. And what you're speaking about with these pillars, and for those that are watching, I'm going to make sure that there's a link to the Secretariat, so that there's a way for folks to sort of see where that is in the ministry. But one of the things that is fascinating is that 2017 would have also been when the Anti-Racism Act came out. And so many of those pillars and those regulatory changes would be in support of legislation like the Anti-Racism Act, right? And so what I'm going to do is we're going to pause with that. I'm going to come back to that question right after this break, but I want folks to be thinking a little bit about the action items that you're talking about and the pillars that you were creating on that one end, and these discussions that we've been having in the show around provincial legislation that might be driving some of those changes, or it could be vice versa. So we're going to pause 1 second. We'll be right back after this break.
Aging Well brings you conversations with experts to help empower your golden years with enthusiasm and optimism. Don't miss Aging Well with Angela and Alice Liu, Mondays at 7 p.m.
What's Up Stratford is a monthly look at what's happening in and around Stratford. Host Peter Morange talks to a variety of guests, from politicians to artists. What's Up Stratford, Sundays at 3:30 p.m.
Hello, be sure to join me on Mondays at 8 p.m. here on Rogers TV for Lions TV Bingo. And starting this summer, we're going to have a new kind of card. Yep, it's going to look like this. Yeah, there you are. And there's going to be no colors, but the games are going to be outlined. You can see here that the outline for the L game is in white. New cards for the same great game every Monday, 8 p.m., Lions TV Bingo on Rogers TV.
Everybody knows not to drink and drive, but some people still think it's okay to take drugs and drive. Police have the authority, the ability, and the tools to determine if drivers are impaired by legal or illegal drugs. And because drug-impaired drivers can pose just as great a risk as drunk drivers, they face the same penalties, like the loss of their driver's license, a criminal record, fines, and more. A message from the RCMP, the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police, and Arrive Alive, Drive Sober.
Mondays at 6 p.m., we're bringing an exciting new show to you, Inside Brant with Armanda. You can look forward to it to find out what's going on in Brant County. And we will have all kinds of local artisans and tons of stuff that your family can enjoy. So if it's happening here in Brant County, you can be sure to see it here, 6 p.m. every Monday on Inside Brant.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. So, Pat, I want us to start where we left off just before the break. So you were talking about these pillars that were developed when you started 2017. And I found myself thinking about 2017 being the same time that the Anti-Racism Act comes out, for instance, like as an example of legislation changes are happening here. We're seeing policy changes on the other side of this big, huge system. Right. But one of the things that I always found fascinating when I was in public office was that I was not allowed to debate regulations that were happening, whether I heard they were coming or whatever. I could only speak about legislation. And so I'm wondering if we can just take a moment to think a bit about these regulation things. Like, what is that's happening on that end? What impact does that have? Is that understood differently on the ground than legislation as it comes through? Like, what is happening in that particular, in the creation of those regulations?
So what people need to know is that regulations are what essentially guides agencies in what to do under the legislation. So the legislation will be very broad. So I'll give you an example. If you look at legislation governing family benefits, or you look at the legislation, let's take that as an example. ODSP, right? Yep. Not family benefits, but ODSP. The legislation itself is very general in its terms. Then what the government wants to do is to tell agencies how to actually action that legislation. And that's in the regulations, and it's in policy manuals that will follow the development of the regulation. So the detail, when people say the devil's in the details, it really is, because the details about what's going to happen at a local level in those offices, ODSP offices, that's in the regulation, right? And it's in the at the discretion of the government to determine what those regulations are going to look like. Here's the thing people need to know, though, right? The regulations are also subject to public consultation. There's a public consultation. So though you might not be able to legislate with regard to regulation from your seat in the legislature, those regulations are posted, and people do have an opportunity to weigh in, right?
So I want us to pause there for one sec, because in the process when a bill becomes a law, there are moments where community can provide their input. So
But
Unless
I'm
the
talking,
government
I'm
decides,
talking
yeah,
at this more granular
that's right.
level, right?
That's right.
Where it's how's this legislation going to be actioned, right?
Yeah.
Now the regulation is posted, people have an opportunity to to engage and to comment. And one of the things that I noticed when I was at the ministry was that those that input is actually taken pretty seriously,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what'll happen is that the lawyers will at the ministries will work on drafting the regulations. They'll be approved for going through the committee process, for being posted, and the comments that people make publicly come back to through the lawyers and through the political process, and there's discussion, right,
Yep. Yep.
about the comments that are made and the input that's being made by people in the public. So it's really important that people engage with um, with the posted regulations.
So
It's really critical.
can I ask you a question about that?
Yeah.
In my time in office, there were moments where something should have gone to public consultation, to that part of the committee or that legislative consultation process with the public, and the government could do things to sort of bypass that and push it through faster. On the regulatory side, is it a requirement that there be an opportunity where the regulations are posted and the public can give impact, or can that also be
It's
bypassed?
a requirement, but
Okay.
there are two, and forgive me, but I've forgotten what what the
No,
actual
no worries.
days limits are. But there are two periods. One that the government can choose, either a 30-day limit for consultations or another X number of days limit that's escaped my
Yep.
memory right now. But nevertheless, that has to be done.
Okay. And
Right.
so, how does the government, if I'm thinking about something like Bill 33 in particular, because people are
Right.
often asking me, like, how do we provide our feedback? Does the government receive that community feedback in the same way that they do with legislation, where you'd have to come to Queen's Park? Sometimes they travel a bill, but oftentimes you've got to go to Queen's Park on these set days, or is
You
it
know,
like written feedback?
people will write in.
They write in.
Yeah.
And then that information is taken into consideration by, for instance, in your particular role, in your former role.
Um, primarily, but prim, primarily, but by the lawyers, but in collaboration with people in my role. Right.
Okay.
Like
Beautiful.
I'll know about it
Yeah.
and weigh in on it. Right.
Beautiful. And so if you think specifically about Bill 33, and let's say, so we know that we've now explained, because again, a lot of folks believe that the only time that you can push back on legislation, not just Bill 33, but anything that is happening at Queen's Park, is at the time that it's sitting in that chamber. But I want folks to understand that there are other times where community can provide feedback, raise concerns, be paying attention. So if you're thinking about Bill 33 in particular, is
Right.
there anything that you think folks should be sort of paying attention to? I don't want you to like sway them in one way or another, but are there things inside of that you're like, you know what, folks, maybe pay attention to what's going to happen here, or how this process might happen, or anything like that, so that people can find ways to be speaking to the government about it in a way that's more meaningful?
Okay. So, um, with regard to the bill, it's hard to know at this point what parts of it will be committed to legislation and what
Okay.
parts of it might be committed to regulation, right?
Got it. Yep.
It's not that's not necessarily a certainty, right? Um, but certainly people can comment on the parts of it that are committed to legislation once it goes to committee, right?
Yep.
People can weigh in at that level, and then later, as regulations are posted, by making submissions on the regulation, on the proposed regulations. So it takes like really being watchful of the legislative process. For example, and listening to what ministers say. So, for example, Minister Calandra said that that he intends to make changes with regard to the governance of school boards
Yeah.
by the end of this year. The legislature is winding up, I think, around December the 11th.
Yep.
So that's a very short window. So it's possible that if he keeps to that timetable, it's possible that within weeks from now, legislation will be tabled, right?
Yep.
And people
Yep.
need to keep their eyes on that because it will move, if he's to keep to his timetable, rather rapidly, right? And
Yeah.
they have the votes to do that in the legislature, right?
Yeah, and I think that raises another issue that I've spoken about with past guests about this bill. For instance, the reintroduction of the school resource officer has been a big part of conversation across the province. And
Right.
one of the things that we saw was a ministerial directive that required that at least one of these PD days be dedicated, so a professional development day for the educators across the province, be dedicated to the SRO program. And so that's happening even though the legislation isn't yet law because Bill 33 is still
Right.
going through that
Right.
process.
Right.
Are there places where when maybe it's not about regulatory things anymore, but are there ways then for the public to communicate their questions or their concerns or even their appreciation? Because there are some things that have happened that have been extremely positive. If I think about things like the graduate success coaches that were implemented in a number of schools across the province, those have been really positive introductions in the school system. Are there
Right.
places where one can get in touch with the ministry? Because I know one of the concerns are that we it's not easy to access a minister. Is it easy for us to get in touch with an assistant deputy minister to raise concerns? Is that the right place if we have questions, or is it
No.
at the trustees table that we need to be looking?
Well, I think that it's letters requesting meetings with the minister,
Ah,
right?
yeah,
You'd be surprised the degree to which those letters are taken seriously, right? People need to demand meetings with the minister. Well, you know, and I think, you know, let's see, tenor has a lot to do with it. When I say demand meetings, I mean, you know, laying out the
yeah,
concerns people have about the reintroduction of the SROs, and saying that they want to meet with the minister to speak directly about those concerns, and that needs to be done now,
yeah.
right? That
Not
needs to be
waiting
done now.
until, not
That's
waiting until.
Do not wait. That needs to be done now.
Yeah.
Um, there's another level at which people need to engage, and that is with the various police services boards around the province,
Mhm.
right? So, who do you know who's on the police services board? When is this matter coming up for conversation, and will it come up for conversation at the police services board? Who do you know in the senior ranks of of local police forces? So a small town, relatively small place like Guelph, for example, and
Mhm.
speaking directly to police forces about, not actioning this, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, it's more difficult with the OPP because they essentially police um, smaller municipalities and rural areas outside of the big towns, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And from what I understand, um, uh, quite often the OPP they have a desire to get back in the schools.
Yeah.
Um, Municipal police may be a different thing, and people might have much more sway in approaching those police forces in Guelph, Kitchener, Waterloo, and Cambridge, and so on directly.
Beautiful. So, what we're going to do, I'm going to pause our conversation there and take another quick break. But when we come back, I want us to go back over this idea of supervision and the role of school board trustees, and now the conversations that we've been hearing from the minister about getting rid of them altogether. And so, we're going to be back right after this break.
Hello, be sure to join me on Mondays at 8 p.m. here on Rogers TV for Lions TV Bingo. And starting this summer, we're going to have a new kind of card. So remember, new cards for the same great game every Monday, Lions TV Bingo.
Hey, what's up? We're Chris and Cam, host of What's Buzzin' right here on Rogers TV.
We talk about local trends, we interview local guests, and we overall just have a lot of fun.
8 p.m. Wednesday nights on Rogers TV.
Stay tuned.
Hi, I'm Dave Carroll. Every Thursday at 8 p.m. right here on Rogers TV, we have a brand new show called About Brant with Dave Carroll. We're going to be talking about Brant and the different areas of the community that makes Brantford, Brant County's Six Nations tick. We're going to be talking with people from all sorts of different areas and helping us understand the community we have better. Every Thursday, 8 p.m., About Brant with Dave Carroll right here on Rogers TV.
Hi, Pastor Mark here. Join us each and every week on Sundays. There is a place for you here, a place to explore, a place to dream, a place to journey, and a place to belong. All are welcome, no exceptions. That is St. Peter's Church, every Sunday at 11 a.m. God bless. We'll see you soon.
It's closing time. And you stayed out longer than you planned. So now you can't drive. And the buses have stopped running. You could always call your girlfriend. Or maybe your roommate. What about your best friend? You could just dial 1-888 Taxi Guy or use the Taxi Guy app. The call and the app are free, and they both connect you to a local cab company to bring you home safely. Visit arrivealive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive, drive sober.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Okay, so Pat, I want us to go back thinking about Bill 33 and this notion of supervision, of board supervision. So this has been a question that has been raised by a couple of guests over the last few episodes. People have questions about the scope of supervision. So when a minister says we are going to send in a supervisor, people have asked me, like, how do they determine who the supervisor is? I had my last guest was speaking a little bit about that. And also, what can a supervisor do and what are their limits? Are there limits? And so I thought you'd be the perfect person to weigh in on this. So what is talk to me about supervision. What is it? What are the limits? What do we have to be concerned about? What's happening?
So currently, there are a lot of steps that have to take place before you get to supervision of a board. I've been engaged now with 4 processes that could have led to or did lead to board supervision. Right?
Okay.
And in each of those circumstances, before you get to the point where a supervisor is appointed, there's going to be an investigation, right? Mm-hmm. There's going to be a review, rather, of the school board. Mm-hmm. The board is going to get an opportunity to put things right. If they fail in that opportunity to put things right, there's going to be an investigation. The investigation is going to be shorter than a review, likely, and then subsequent to the investigation, if the minister is satisfied that the investigation shows that the board has failed to put the recommendations in the in the review into action, then they may appoint a supervisor for the board. Right? It's a long and cumbersome process. It's the the supervision process really resides in two different places in the education legislation universe. One has to do with financial problems. Those provisions are wholly within the Education Act. The second has to do with matters of public interest that go beyond finances. So where a board's gone off the rails, right?
Yep.
In terms of its working with communities or its outcomes for students and so on. And that is governed by both legislation and regulation. And it is the case that because of the novelty of the reviews that have taken place over the past 10 or 12 years or so, the regulation has to be amended every time there was a suggestion that there be a review. Every time it was suggested that there be an investigation and then possibly the appointment of a supervisor. So that's a difficult and cumbersome process. But there are ideas or theories about why the process needs to be cumbersome.
Yeah.
What we're dealing with here is an elected level of government. You don't want to make it necessarily that easy for other levels of government to interfere, right?
Yeah.
And so the process needs to be one that is that leads to some degree of certainty about the need for supervision, the need for a board to be taken over, right? What the amendments do is to truncate that process, right?
This is, sorry, the amendments in Bill 33.
The amendments in Bill
Got it.
33.
Okay.
They truncate that process. Certainly, they would seem to be clearer, but much shorter. I don't see in Bill 33 a possibility for a board, for example, to receive a draft report from reviewers to look at it and consider whether they can comply with the recommendations made by the reviewers.
Yeah.
What I see is an investigation, a report to the minister, and the minister then deciding to go in or not with a supervisor. That's a much shorter and truncated process. And I'm not sure that that process continues to honor the notion this is an elected level of government. We need to be much more careful with the way in which we intervene, right? I think that changes with Bill 33, and so that would seem to me to be problematic. I do think that there's a need for reforming the process so it's not as cumbersome, and there's no need to be rushing off and getting amendments to the regulation every time you want to do supervision. But perhaps not as cut and dried, or as is proposed in Bill 33.
And so in that supervision, in that conversation around supervision, at that point, there's no space for the community to be speaking back, except for potentially during the investigation, right? Because in an investigation, you might be speaking to community depending on what it is that you're investigating.
Speaking with them all through the review.
Got it.
All through the review. I mean, in the work that I've been engaged with, the first people to be spoken with were people in the community.
Yeah.
Right, and throughout the process, people in the community are engaged in speaking with the reviewers, and perhaps a little less so in the investigation, because that investigation is looking at, well, the facts of whether the board has complied with what the minister said they need to do post review, right? So a little less in the investigative stage, but certainly like mountains of communication with communities through the actual review process itself.
And now, so then that truncating of the time before supervision happens also truncates the opportunities for
It may well
community.
have that effect.
We don't know yet, but that
We
could.
don't know yet. It may well have that effect of reducing the time in which people are engaged. Yeah.
And so if we take that, and as my mummy says, we stick a pin in that conversation and we move over to something else that the minister had said, and you'd raised this already. In a press conference, he had mentioned the possibility of legislation appearing by the end of this term, in which he would get rid of these trustees or altogether. That is my understanding of what he was intimating, though we haven't seen the legislation at all.
Right.
From your vantage point in the variety of spaces that you have been in education, what impact do you think that might have? Like, let's say he does say he's going to get rid of the trustees. I've had a couple people come on to talk about what the role is, because some
Right.
folks don't know what that role is. But what do you
Right.
think that the impact of that might be?
Well, it rather all depends on what they intend to replace it with, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's not to say that in all cases the trustee's role is the best role
Mm-hmm.
uh, with regard to interfacing with schools. Here's the thing for me.
Mm-hmm.
I, I've school for new Canadians.
Yep.
School is the first one of the first institutions they interact with,
Yeah. Yeah.
and their interactions with schools and with school trustees uh, are in many cases their first contact with representative democracy.
Yep.
And so the whole process of having school trustees, having school boards, it seems to me, is fundamentally important.
Yep.
In a country like ours, and in a province like ours, where so many people come from countries where that possibility does not exist, right?
Yeah.
That possibility of engagement with elected officials doesn't exist. Just the idea that
Yeah.
they're there and that I'm represented by somebody is of fundamental importance, it seems to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that disappears when trustees are no longer elected.
Yeah.
I also worry that the theory is, and I've seen this written in opinion columns in the newspapers over the last several weeks or so, that, we should just leave the system up to the bureaucrats, right? Let the superintendents and directors of education run the system. I mean, they're paid to listen to parents, but it's the fact of the matter is that the systems of streaming and the not so good parts of education have been upheld by educators for decades.
Yeah. Yeah.
How do we affect change as far as
Yeah.
those things are concerned if what we're doing is speaking only to those people who actually manage those systems?
Yes.
One of the things that has happened, and it's been led oftentimes by the Toronto District School Board, is that engagement, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
About streaming, that
Mm-hmm.
engagement about special education, those engagements about schools being more representative of the communities that they serve. Like those are the trustees have done that, not
Yeah.
have raised those kinds of things, and not necessarily administrators. Certainly, there have been many senior administrators and administrators that have worked on those issues diligently, right? But this is a system that works in collaboration between the position of school trustees representing communities and senior administrators. I worry about taking that about eliminating that collaboration.
So, I want us to sit with that information that you've provided us with, but I have this desire to always have an opportunity for us to speak into being what it is that we want to see. And so what I do ask all of my guests at the end of our interviews is this single question. If you could snap your fingers and you could make one system change, and I know this is a major system and there's a lot.
Let me speak to that, right?
Talk to me.
Look at right now, about a third of the trustees in Ontario are acclaimed into office, right? People in many communities aren't paying attention to trustee elections. How do we have people pay attention? It's not about getting rid of them. How do we have the public re-engage with the position of trustee? And I think that the way to doing that is to restore some of the responsibilities that trustees had in the past that have been appropriated by the province. That appropriation was at a high level before the pandemic. I have to tell you that during the pandemic, it went on steroids, right? The system depended daily on the ministry telling it, do this, do that, do the other. Right? It's easy now for the province to see, well, we're running them anyway. What do we need these people for? Well, I'm not sure that that's the answer. I think the answer is give back some of that power to school trustees that will engage communities more closely in the issues having to do with trustee election.
That's fantastic, because interestingly enough, one of the other guests was talking about how do we ignite excitement in the public around the trustees, around that particular election.
I think that's the issue.
This is it. So, Pat, I just want to say thank you again for spending time with me and sharing all of this wealth of information with the viewers, because unless you know somebody who's been inside the system, you don't really know how it works. And so I just want to say thank you for joining me today.
And thanks for having me here.
Totally my pleasure. And so, folks, it's been fun. See that? I love it. I love it. So we're going to take a quick break and I will be right back.
Aging Well brings you conversations with experts to help empower your golden years with enthusiasm and optimism. Don't miss Aging Well with Angela and Alice Liu, Mondays at 7 p.m.
What's Up Stratford is a monthly look at what's happening in and around Stratford. Host Peter Moranger talks to a variety of guests, from politicians to artists. What's Up Stratford, Sundays at 3:30 p.m.
Hi, I'm Dave Carroll. Every Thursday at 8 p.m. right here on Rogers TV, we have a brand new show called About Brant with Dave Carroll. We're going to be talking about Brant and the different areas of the community that makes Brant County's Six Nations tick. We're going to be talking with people from all sorts of different areas and helping us understand the community we have better. Every Thursday, 8 p.m., About Brant with Dave Carroll, right here on Rogers TV.
I'm Wendell Clark with a word about winning. We all know it takes a team effort in any sport and with any challenge. You can be a part of the winning team that shuts out impaired driving. Whether you're out on the town or just hanging out with friends, drink responsibly. Always have a plan for a safe ride home for yourself, your family, and your friends. You'll be helping to shut out impaired driving.
Visit ArriveAlive.org to find out more. Arrive Alive. Drive sober.
Hello, be sure to join me on Mondays at 8 p.m. here on Rogers TV for Lions TV Bingo. And starting this summer, we're going to have a new kind of card. Yep, it's going to look like this. Yeah, there you are. And there's going to be no colors, but the games are going to be outlined. You can see here that it outlined for the L game is in white. New cards for the same great game every Monday, 8 p.m. Lions TV Bingo on Rogers TV.
Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Wasn't that an awesome conversation with my friend, Pat Case? So what I can promise you is this, because he left a lot of very cool nuggets. I am most definitely going to have a link to some of the reports that he was speaking to. He has also made sure that there's access to the Peel District School Board report. It was the review of the Peel District School Board, the Toronto District School Board, and the York Region District School Board. I do have, sometimes it's hard to find some of these reports on the ministry website, so I'll make sure that there's a link to that. I also want to make sure that I connect anybody who's watching to the Education Act, and in particular, the discussions around trustees' roles and the supervision, because Pat did give us a lot of very important wisdom on those pieces, as well as a link to the website or the web page on the ministry's website for regulatory changes and the input when they're soliciting input from community. I want to make sure that we have that so that people can take a look and keep an eye on it. So please do not forget to follow me on Instagram at everydaypolitics_official. And I will be sure to respond to anybody who reaches out to me there. Thank you again so much for coming and watching this. And I cannot wait to share my next guest with you next week.
Connect with us by visiting our website or email us at comments@rogerstv.com.
Summer days, summer nights, lots of things to do, places to go, and people to see. If you're having a few drinks, be sure to plan ahead and get home safely. We don't want to pick you up. Drinking drivers risk injuries to themselves and others and take chances with their license, their jobs, and their future. Remember what's at stake and choose your ride, whether you're the driver, the passenger, or the party host. Thanks for supporting sober driving. I hope we never meet.
Visit arrivealive.org to find out more.
The human brain. It can still leave us completely mystified. Do you see something?
Hidden cameras are all over the place.
She's experiencing Truman Show syndrome. The patient has no control over his own arm.
It says here he's non-speaking.
Non-speaking is just a symptom of something bigger. Question is what?
I know you're not a real doctor.
You're right. I just play one on TV.
Joel Sherbino and the Paris Community Church helped connect life with faith through their program, Sundays for Paris. Hear sermons, listen to hymns, experience all that the Paris Community Church has to offer. Sundays for Paris, Sunday.